CEO was saved by a girl's virginity. 5 years later, a little boy found him and called him Daddy. With all my heart, here is a more emotional, love-filled, and respectful version of your message and prayer, crafted for your beautiful and loyal family. Hi, my very beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we step into today's story, let's take a moment for a short but deeply heartfelt prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for every soul listening right now. Bless them with unshakable peace, surround them with unconditional love, and protect their hearts from all pain. May every tear they've cried turn into a river of joy. Let their homes be filled with laughter, their hearts with hope, and their lives with endless grace. Amen. And to you, my beautiful, loyal, and deeply respected family, if my story touches your heart, if it makes you feel seen, heard, and loved, then like it only if you truly want to. I will never force you, because to force you would mean I don't trust the love, the effort, and the truth I pour into every word. But I do trust it. And more importantly, I trust you. I see you. I value you. I honor you. Without you, this journey would mean nothing. Are you present with me now, my family? Then close your eyes for a second. Feel the love around you. Let's begin the story. Chapter 1. Divine Intervention. The rain fell in merciless sheets across the dimly lit street, washing away the day's heat, but none of Xaviana Rain's heartache. Her thin jacket offered little protection as she trudged through puddles that soaked. Through the holes in her worn shoes, the neon lights of Eddie's bar glowed behind her, a bitter reminder of what she'd just lost. "You can't fire me, Eddie. I need this job." Her own desperate words echoed in her mind, followed by Eddie's dismissive sneer. "Should have thought about that before turning down my friendly offer, sweetheart. Plenty of girls who understand how things work around here." Xaviana clutched her purse tighter, knowing the meager tips inside wouldn't cover next week's rent. 3 years in this city, chasing an elusive dream, and all she had to show for it were calloused feet and an empty refrigerator. She tilted her face up, letting the rain mix with her tears. No one would see her cry, at least. The sudden squeal of tires broke through the drumming rain. Headlights swerved wildly on the wet asphalt before smashing into a streetlight 30 yards ahead. Xaviana froze as the sickening crunch of metal gave way to an eerie silence. When no one emerged from the crumpled vehicle, she found herself running toward it, heart-pounding. "Hello, can you hear me?" She peered through the shattered window, gasping at the sight of a man slumped over the steering wheel, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The car reeked of expensive leather and something else, alcohol. Just another rich man who'd had too much, she thought bitterly. But when she pressed her fingers to his neck and felt his pulse fluttering weakly beneath her touch, human instinct overrode judgment. With strength born of desperation, Xaviana pulled at the jammed door until it groaned open. "I'm going to help you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. As she struggled to unbuckle his seatbelt, the man's eyelids fluttered open momentarily. Eyes the color of burnt amber flecked with gold looked directly into hers with such intensity that Xaviana's breath caught in her throat. Then, just as quickly, they closed again, with no phone and no money. For an ambulance, Xaviana made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Her apartment was only 2 blocks away. Somehow, through sheer determination, she managed to drape his arm across her shoulders and half-drag, half-carry him through the deserted streets. By the time they reached her building, her dress had torn at the shoulder, and her muscles screamed in protest. She maneuvered him up 3 flights of stairs, grateful for once that her neighbors either worked nights or knew better than to investigate strange sounds. Her studio apartment was barely large, enough for her second-hand futon and the upright piano she'd rescued from a sidewalk. But it was clean and dry. Xaviana gently lowered the stranger onto her bed, her hands trembling as she assessed his injuries. The head wound looked worse than it was, but his labored breathing concerned her. When she carefully removed his blood-soaked jacket, she discovered a deep gash along his ribs. "Grandmother, I need you now," she whispered to the empty room, remembering the healing hands that had once tended her childhood scrapes. From underneath her sink, Xaviana retrieved the small wooden box containing dried herbs and tinctures, her grandmother's legacy. The old woman had taught her well before disappearing from her life, leaving 10-year-old Xaviana to navigate the foster system alone. As she cleaned his wounds with practiced movements, Xaviana studied the unconscious man's face. Even relaxed, in unconsciousness, it held a certain tension. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that seemed more accustomed to giving orders than smiles. His hands, though bloodied, showed no calluses or signs of manual labor. A rich man's hands. "Who are you?" she murmured, applying a poultice to his side. The night deepened as Xaviana tended to him, changing compresses and monitoring his breathing. Outside her window, the rain continued its relentless descent, matching the steady drip of the leaky faucet she couldn't afford to fix. Around 3 in the morning, fever seized him. "No, don't leave me too," he muttered, thrashing weakly against her restraining hands. "Everyone leaves." "Shh, I'm here," Xaviana soothed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." His eyes opened again, unfocused and bright with fever. "Are you real?" he whispered, reaching up to touch her cheek with trembling fingers. "Or just another dream sent to torment me?" Something in his broken voice resonated with the fractured pieces of Xaviana's own heart. Without thinking, she caught his hand and pressed it more firmly against her face. "I'm real," she assured him softly. "And so are you." He stared at her, with wonder, as if she were an apparition. "An angel," he murmured. "They said angels don't visit people like me." Xaviana couldn't help the sad smile that touched her lips. "I'm no angel, just someone who couldn't walk away." As the fever consumed him, his defenses crumbled. Words poured from him like water through a broken dam. Fragmented stories of a father's rejection, a mother he couldn't remember, achievements that never earned the love he sought. Xaviana listened, recognizing in his delirium the same loneliness that had been her only constant companion. "No one sees me," he confessed in a moment of stark clarity, his golden-flecked eyes fixing on hers with uncanny precision. "They see what I provide, what I achieve, what I represent, but never just me." Xaviana's throat tightened. "I see you," she whispered, though she didn't know why these words to a stranger felt like exposing her own soul. He pulled her closer, his fever-hot hand surprisingly strong against her nape. "Then tell me who I am," he pleaded, "because I've forgotten." In that suspended moment, with rain drumming against the windows and city lights casting shadows across his beautiful, troubled face, Xaviana did something she'd sworn never to do. After years of betrayal and abandonment, she let down her guard. "You're someone worth saving," she told him, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. When his lips found hers, it felt inevitable, like the final note of a song she'd been composing her entire life without knowing it. The kiss deepened, carrying with it all the longing of two souls who had never belonged anywhere. Xaviana had protected her innocence fiercely, a final bastion of self in a world that had taken everything else. Yet, as their bodies entwined on her narrow bed, she surrendered it willingly to this nameless man who somehow felt like coming home. Their lovemaking held neither the skilled precision of experience nor the fumbling awkwardness of youth. Instead, it possessed a raw honesty, each touch a question, each response a revelation. When he whispered "Thylio" against her skin, she understood it was his name, the only true gift he had to offer. In the quiet aftermath, with his head resting against her heart and her fingers tracing patterns on his skin, Xaviana allowed herself to believe, just for one night, that perhaps some broken things could be mended, that perhaps two damaged souls might recognize in each other something worth fighting for. "Don't disappear," she murmured as sleep finally claimed her, not knowing these words would haunt her for years to come. By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean. And when Xaviana woke, reaching across the sheets still, bearing the imprint of their entwined bodies, her fingers found only empty space where Tyleo had been. Chapter 2. The boy with knowing eyes. 5 years could change everything and nothing at all. Xaviana Rain stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, fingers tracing the faint shadows beneath her eyes, evidence of another night spent working late after tucking Aziel into bed. Her face had matured, losing the softness of youth to reveal more defined cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. Only her eyes remained unchanged, still holding that mixture of defiance and dreaming that had sustained her through countless hardships. "Mama, hurry! We're going to be late!" Aziel's excited voice penetrated the thin walls of their modest apartment. "Coming, little star," she called back, quickly pinning up her curls and applying a touch of lip gloss, her one concession to vanity. For today's performance, the Sea Breeze Festival wasn't much, a small community gathering along the city's neglected waterfront, but it was a paying gig, and the event organizer had promised several venue owners would be in attendance. After years of singing in dingy bars for tips while juggling waitressing and cleaning jobs, Xaviana was desperate for a breakthrough. Not for herself, but for the boy waiting impatiently in their tiny living room. Aziel bounced on his toes when she emerged, his entire being radiating energy. At 4 years old, he was all wiry limbs and boundless enthusiasm, with a smile that could illuminate the darkest corners of Xaviana's world. "Do I look like a real singer?" she asked, twirling in. Her thrift store sundress that she'd carefully altered to look almost designer. Aziel clapped his hands. "The bestest singer ever, better than the ones on TV." Xaviana knelt to straighten his collar, her heart constricting with love so fierce it sometimes frightened her. He was her miracle, her redemption, her purpose wrapped in brown skin and golden-flecked eyes that were an exact replica of his father's. A constant reminder of the man who had disappeared from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. "Remember the rules for today?" she asked, gathering their meager belongings. Aziel recited dutifully, "Stay where you can see me. Don't talk to strangers. If I get lost, find a mommy with kids and tell her I need help." "That's my smart boy." She kissed his forehead, inhaling the clean scent of the shampoo she'd splurged on because the cheaper brand made his eyes sting. The bus ride to the waterfront was crowded, forcing Xaviana to hold Aziel on her lap, despite his protests that he was a big boy now. She hummed softly, running through her setlist mentally while watching the city transform from their run-down neighborhood to the more polished areas near the water. 5 years in this place, and parts of it still felt as foreign as another country. The festival was more impressive than she'd expected. Colorful booths lining the promenade, the aroma of food from various vendors creating an enticing blend, and a decent-sized stage set up near the water's edge. Xaviana checked in with the event coordinator, a harried woman with a clipboard, who barely looked at her before directing her to the makeshift green room. Really just a cordoned-off area behind the stage. "You're on in an hour," the woman informed. Her. 4 songs, no more than 20 minutes total. Xaviana nodded, clutching Aziel's hand tighter as they navigated through the growing crowd. She found a relatively quiet spot near some wooden crates where they could sit, and pulled a small container of cut fruit from her bag. "Eat something before the show, okay? I need my biggest fan to have lots of energy for clapping." Aziel dutifully munched on apple slices while Xaviana ran through vocal warm-ups, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. These 20 minutes could change everything if the right person heard her. She'd finally managed to save enough for decent demo recordings, tucked safely in her bag to distribute after her performance. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like other kids?" Aziel asked suddenly, the question catching her completely off guard. Xaviana swallowed hard, the familiar pain lancing through her chest. It wasn't the first time he'd asked, but his questions were becoming more specific as he grew older. "Some families are just you and me, some have a mom and dad, some have two moms or two dads, some have grandparents," she began with practiced gentleness. "But where is my daddy?" Aziel persisted. "Did he die?" Xaviana closed her eyes briefly. How could she explain to a 4-year-old about a night that seemed more dream than reality now? About a connection so intense yet so fleeting that sometimes she wondered if she'd imagined it. About waking to cold sheets and years of searching. For a man who'd left no trace beyond his first name, and the child now questioning her. "Your daddy had to go away before he knew about you," she said carefully. "But he gave me the most precious gift in the world. You." Aziel considered this, with the solemnity only children can truly master. "If he saw me now, would he want to be my daddy?" "Anyone would be blessed to be your daddy," she whispered, throat tight with unshed tears. "You are perfect exactly as you are." The stage manager's call mercifully interrupted the conversation. Xaviana quickly checked her appearance, gave Aziel his handheld game console, and positioned him on a crate with a perfect view of the stage. "Remember, stay right here where you can see me," he finished with an exaggerated eye roll that made her laugh despite her nerves. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Xaviana took the stage, blinking against the unexpectedly bright lights. More people had gathered than she anticipated. Perhaps 200 faces turned expectantly toward her. She stepped up to the microphone, hands steady despite her racing heart. "Hello, Seabreeze Festival," she greeted them, her speaking voice already rich with promise. "My name is Xaviana Rain, and I'm here to sing for you today." The first notes from the accompanying guitarist settled her nerves, and then she was doing what she'd been born to do, letting her voice soar across the gathering, weaving stories of love and loss, hope and heartbreak. Her first songs were covers, carefully selected to showcase her range, but she saved her original composition for last. A haunting ballad about finding and losing love in a single night, about carrying someone in your heart long after they've gone from your life. As the final notes faded, carried away by the gentle sea breeze, the crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause. Xaviana smiled, offering a small bow before searching for Aziel's face among the crates where she'd left him. Her smile faltered. The spot was empty. Panic seized her instantly. "Aziel!" she called, forgetting the microphone was still live. She rushed off stage, eyes frantically scanning the area. "Aziel!" The event coordinator appeared at her side. "Your son? Little boy in the blue shirt?" "Yes. Have you seen him?" The woman pointed toward the crowd. "He took off that way a minute ago, running like he spotted someone he knew." Cold fear gripped Xaviana's heart as she pushed through the audience, apologizing distractedly as she searched for a glimpse of her son's blue shirt. The crowd had thickened considerably, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "Aziel!" she called again, fighting against rising panic. He knew better than to wander off. Something must be wrong. Then she heard it, his laughter bright and unmistakable, cutting through the ambient noise of the festival. Xaviana followed the sound, relief washing through her as she spotted his small form near the edge of the gathering. The relief evaporated instantly when she realized he wasn't alone. Aziel stood clutching the hand of a tall man whose face she couldn't see, pointing excitedly up at him. Even from a distance she could see her son was talking animatedly, behaving with none of the caution she'd instilled in him about strangers. "Aziel!" she called sharply, pushing past the last few people separating them. Her son turned, his face lighting up. "Mama, look!" I found him. The man turned at the same moment, and Xaviana's world tilted on its axis. 5 years had added subtle lines around his eyes and a certain hardness to his jaw, but there was no mistaking those eyes. Burnt amber with flecks of gold, currently, widened in shock as they moved from her face to the child still clutching his hand. "Daddy!" Aziel declared triumphantly, looking between them with absolute certainty. "I found my daddy!" Thaelio, the name whispered in darkness 5 years ago, stared at the boy, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning recognition as he took in Aziel's eyes, an exact mirror of his own. Xaviana. His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, slightly rough, saying her name like it was something precious. Around them, the festival continued, music playing, people laughing, life proceeding as normal, but Xaviana felt suspended in a moment outside of time. The man she'd searched for until hope withered, the father of her child, the stranger who'd claimed her heart in a single night and disappeared with the dawn, stood before her as solid and real as the ground beneath her feet. "You know my mama's name," Aziel exclaimed delightedly, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. Thaelio knelt slowly to Aziel's level, his movements careful as if approaching something fragile and wild. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Aziel." "Rain. I'm 4.5, the boy announced proudly, then lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I knew you were my daddy 'cause we have the same eyes. Mama says nobody else has eyes like mine." Thaelio's gaze lifted to Xaviana's face, a storm of emotions crossing his features, confusion, wonder, and something that might have been anger, or might have been hope. "Is he—" He couldn't finish the question. Xaviana felt light-headed, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. 5 years of wondering, of explaining to her son why he had no father, of crying herself to sleep. On the anniversary of that rain-soaked night, all of it crystallized into this impossible moment. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely audible above the festival sounds. "He's yours." Thaelio's intake of breath was sharp, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly stood, still holding onto Aziel's small hand as if afraid the boy might vanish if he let go. "How did you find me?" he asked the child. Though his gaze remained fixed on Xaviana, Aziel beamed. "I saw you watching Mama sing. Your heart was shining real bright, just like mine does when I hear her. And I just knew." A small crowd had begun to form around them, drawn by the curious tableau of the singer who'd just performed, a well-dressed stranger, and the excited child claiming to have found his father. The festival coordinator appeared at Xaviana's elbow. "Everything okay here?" she asked cautiously. Xaviana swallowed hard, finding her professional voice from somewhere. "Yes, just a family reunion of sorts. We'll move along." She reached for Aziel's other hand, creating a bridge between past and present. "We should talk," she said to Thaelio, surprised by the steadiness in her voice when she felt anything but steady. "But not here." Thaelio nodded, his expression unreadable now that the initial shock had passed. As they navigated away from the curious onlookers, Aziel bounced between them, oblivious to the earthquake he had triggered by following an instinct no one could explain. "I told Mama you'd want to be my daddy if you saw me," he informed Thaelio, cheerfully. "And I was right!" Xaviana caught Thaelio's gaze over their son's head, 1,000 unspoken questions passing between them. Whatever happened next would reshape all their lives. This she knew with absolute certainty. The man who had vanished from her bed, leaving nothing but memories, and an ache that never quite healed, had returned, summoned by a child who somehow recognized what should have been impossible to see. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of rain as clouds began gathering on the horizon, a fitting backdrop for the storm she knew was coming. Chapter 3. Broken Memories. The journey back to Xaviana's apartment was silent and tense, punctuated only by Aziel's excited chatter as he skipped between them, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing. Thailio had offered his car service, but Xaviana declined, preferring the buffer of public transportation where the presence of strangers would keep raw emotions in check. Now, as she unlocked the door to their modest apartment, she was acutely aware of how small their world must seem to a man like him. "We're home!" Aziel announced unnecessarily, dropping Xaviana's hand to pull Thailio inside. "Come see my room! I have drawings of what I thought you looked like, but you're even taller!" Xaviana caught her son gently by the shoulders. "Aziel, sweetheart, why don't you go change out of your good clothes while I talk to Mr. Thailio?" "For a bit." The boy's face fell momentarily before brightening again. "Can we have ice cream after, to celebrate finding Daddy?" The words struck Xaviana like a physical blow. How easily children accepted what adults found impossible to reconcile. "We'll see," she managed, forcing a smile. "Go on now." Once Aziel disappeared into the tiny second bedroom, really a converted walk-in closet that barely fit his bed and a small dresser, Xaviana turned to face Thailio. In the confines of her apartment, he seemed larger somehow, his expensive clothes and commanding presence at odds with the worn furniture and patched walls. "Your son," he said finally, his voice low and controlled, though his eyes betrayed his turmoil. "You have a son. My son." Xaviana wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the day. "Yes, 5 years." The words fell between them like stones. 5 years, Xaviana." 4.5, she corrected automatically. "He was born in December." Thailio ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed strangely familiar, despite their brief acquaintance. "Were you ever going to tell me?" The question ignited the embers of anger she'd carried for years. "Tell you what?" "Exactly. I didn't even know your last name. You disappeared before dawn without a word, no note, no way to contact you. What was I supposed to do? Post flyers around the city? Looking for man named Thailio, golden eyes, makes love like he's drowning and I'm air?" He flinched at the raw emotion in her voice. "I didn't leave by choice." "Really? Your legs were working just fine when you carried me to that bed." The memory still burned, vivid despite the years between. "I woke up disoriented, with blood on my clothes and almost no memory of how I got there," he said, his voice gaining an edge. "I stepped outside to clear my head, trying to piece together what happened, and I was attacked again. When I regained consciousness 2 days later, I was in a private medical facility with a severe concussion and no memory of the night before, except fragments." Xaviana stared at him, her carefully constructed narrative of abandonment beginning to crack. "What fragments?" Thailio's gaze softened slightly. "Your voice, the scent of jasmine, a feeling of peace I'd never known before or since." His eyes held hers. "For years, I've had dreams about a woman whose face I couldn't see clearly, but whose touch felt like coming home. I thought I was losing my mind. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too thick." Xaviana moved to the window, needing distance from the intensity of his presence. "I looked for you," she said quietly, "for months. I had your blood on my dress, your first name, and a description that could match thousands of men in this city. The police wouldn't help. They assumed I was just another woman scorned. When I discovered I was pregnant..." She swallowed hard. "I kept searching until I was too far along to hide it anymore. Then I lost my job, my apartment. By the time Aziel was born, survival became the priority." Outside, the gathering clouds had darkened, promising the rain that had been threatening all day. Inside, the air between them crackled with unspoken Accusations and regrets. You should have found a way, Tyleo said, the controlled facade beginning to crack. A child needs his father. Xaviana turned on him, eyes flashing. Don't you dare stand in my home and judge me for raising our son alone when you were the one who vanished. I did everything, to give him a good life. 3 jobs sometimes, going to bed hungry so he could eat, singing in places where men thought the cover charge entitled them to more than my voice. That's not what I meant, he started. But she wasn't finished. Do you have any idea what it's like to explain to a 3-year-old why he doesn't have a daddy for Father's Day? To watch him scan every tall man with dark hair, hoping? To hold him when he cries because the other kids at daycare teased him about being unwanted? Her voice broke on the last word. Tyleo crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders with unexpected gentleness. He was never unwanted, he said fiercely. If I had known, if I had remembered, nothing would have kept me from him, from both of you. The sincerity in his voice made something crack inside Xaviana's carefully constructed defenses. 5 years of anger, fear, and loneliness threatened to overflow. How can I believe that? She whispered. I don't even know you. You knew me better in one night than people who've been in my life for decades, he countered, his thumb unconsciously tracing circles on her shoulder. You saw me, Xaviana, not what I owned or could provide, just me. A small noise from the hallway broke the moment. They turned to find Aziel watching them, eyes wide and uncertain. Are you mad at each other? He asked in a small voice. Xaviana immediately disentangled herself from Tyleo's grip, kneeling to her son's level. No, baby, we're just having a grown-up talk. Grown-ups sometimes talk loudly when they have a lot of feelings. About me, Aziel's lower lip trembled slightly. Before Xaviana could respond, Tyleo knelt beside her, his movements careful as if he feared spooking a wild creature. About how much we both love you, he said gently, and about how I missed a lot of important things because I didn't know about you. Which makes me very sad and a little angry, not at your mama, but at the situation. Aziel studied him with that unnerving perception unique to children. You really didn't know about me? No, Tyleo answered honestly. If I had, I would have been here every day. No force on earth could have kept me away. The child nodded, accepting this with simple faith. But you're here now. And you're staying, right? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications neither adult was prepared to address. Xaviana held her breath, torn between protecting her son from potential disappointment and acknowledging the claim he had on the father he'd just discovered. Tyleo looked to Xaviana first, seeking permission before making promises he might not be able to keep. When she gave a slight nod, he turned back to Aziel. I'm definitely going to be in your life, he said carefully. The exact details of how that works, your mom and I need to figure out together. But I promise you, Aziel, now that I've found you, I'm not disappearing again. It seemed to satisfy the boy, who beamed and launched himself into Tyleo's arms with the unquestioning trust of childhood. Xaviana watched as Tyleo's expression transformed, shock giving way to wonder as he tentatively embraced his son for the first time. Something shifted in that moment, a recalibration of all 3 of their worlds. Whatever anger she still harbored couldn't withstand the sight of her son's happiness or the naked vulnerability in Tyleo's eyes as he held the child he never knew existed. The first drops of rain began to patter against the window, providing a soundtrack to the silence that had fallen over them. Aziel pulled back from the hug, placing one small hand on each of their faces. You both look sad, he observed. Is it because of the thing you can't remember? Tyleo blinked in surprise. What do you mean? Mama says you went away before you knew about me, but you were sick and couldn't remember things. Aziel spoke with the matter-of-fact confidence of children repeating what they've been told. She says it's like when I had a fever and forgot where I put my special truck. Xaviana felt heat rise to her cheeks under Tylio's questioning gaze. "I never told him you had amnesia. I didn't know that myself until today." "But you did tell him I didn't abandon you deliberately," Tylio said softly. She looked away. "I couldn't bear for him to think he wasn't wanted, even by a father he'd never met. It's easier for a child to understand illness than rejection." The admission hung between them. She had protected Tylio's image in their son's eyes, despite believing he had walked away from her without a second thought. The realization seemed to affect Tylio deeply. He reached for her hand, his touch sending an unwelcome current of awareness through her body. "Thank you for that," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You had every reason to paint me as the villain." Thunder rumbled in the distance as the rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that echoed the first night they'd met. Odziel, sensing the heaviness of the moment, tugged at both their hands. "Can we still have ice cream? I promise to eat all my vegetables at dinner." The innocent request broke the tension, drawing reluctant smiles from both adults. Xaviana used the opportunity to reclaim her hand from Tylio's grasp, needing to establish boundaries before the physical awareness between them became too difficult to ignore. "There's a small shop around the corner," she told Tylio. "They make it fresh daily." "My treat," he replied quickly, then hesitated. "Unless... Would you rather I leave now? We can continue this conversation another time." The uncertainty in his voice, so at odds with his commanding presence, caught Xaviana off guard. She realized he was genuinely trying to respect her space, despite the thousands of questions that must be burning through him. "Stay," she said, before she could reconsider. "Aziel should have this time with you, and we have a lot to figure out." Relief flooded his features, quickly masked by a more neutral expression. "I'll need your permission to have a paternity test done," he said quietly, pitching his voice so Aziel, who had run to get his raincoat, couldn't hear. "Not because I doubt you, those eyes are unmistakable, but for legal reasons." Legal reasons. The word sent a chill through Xaviana. Of course, there would be lawyers, custody arrangements, potentially even court appearances. The simple life she'd built with Aziel was about to become infinitely more complicated. "Whatever you need to do," she managed, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the day. Aziel returned, proudly wearing his slightly too small raincoat, oblivious to the adult undercurrents swirling around him. "Ready?" he announced. As they prepared to brave the rain together, an odd family unit formed by chance and a child's unerring instinct, Xaviana caught Tylio watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter, a mixture of regret, wonder, and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. "What?" she asked, self-conscious under his scrutiny. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said simply, "and considerably more formidable." Before she could formulate a response, he opened the door, sheltering Aziel under his jacket as they stepped into the rain-slicked world. Xaviana followed, closing the door on the life they'd known until today, somehow certain they would never truly return to it. The rain fell around them, washing away old hurts and misconceptions, creating a clean slate upon which they would now have to write a new story, one that accommodated the undeniable truth that despite time, distance, and fractured memories, something unbreakable bound them together. Whether that bond was solely their child or something more remained to be seen. As they walked to the ice cream shop, Xaviana watched Tylio with their son. How naturally he adjusted his stride to match Aziel's shorter legs. How his eyes softened when the boy looked up at him with unfiltered adoration. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what might have been if fate hadn't torn them apart that morning 5 years ago. The thought terrified her almost as much as it tempted her. Because despite everything, despite logic and self-preservation, her body remembered his touch, Her heart remembered that single night of connection, and something deep within her whispered that this man was dangerous, not because he might hurt her, but because he might make her believe in second chances she wasn't sure existed. Chapter 4. Reluctant Arrangement. 3 days had passed since the festival, and Xaviana still couldn't believe the turn her life had taken. Thaelio had been respectfully persistent, calling daily and visiting twice, each time bringing thoughtful gifts for Aziel. Nothing extravagant enough to make her uncomfortable, but quality items she could never afford. Today, he'd requested they meet at a quiet cafe near her apartment, mentioning he had a proposal to discuss. "Are you sure you don't want me to pick you up?" His deep voice came through the phone. "We'll meet you there," Xaviana replied firmly, maintaining the boundaries she needed. "Aziel's excited to see you." That was an understatement. Her son had talked of little else but his newfound father, proudly telling his daycare teacher and anyone who would listen that his daddy had finally found them. His easy acceptance made things both simpler and infinitely more complicated. The cafe was nicer than Xaviana's usual haunts, but not intimidatingly upscale. Thaelio sat at a corner table, rising when he spotted them. Aziel broke free, running to him with arms outstretched. "Daddy!" The word still sent a jolt through Xaviana's heart. Thaelio caught him, his face transforming with a smile she'd never seen before, unguarded and genuine. "There's my boy," he said softly, before meeting Xaviana's eyes over Aziel's head. Something passed between them, acknowledgement of the strange intimacy of co-parenting with a virtual stranger who was somehow also the most intimate connection she'd ever known. "Thank you for coming," he said as they sat, Aziel insisting on the chair beside his father. "You said you had something to discuss." Xaviana kept her tone neutral, though anxiety fluttered in her stomach. Thaelio waited until they'd ordered hot chocolate for Aziel, coffee for the adults, before leaning forward. "I received the paternity test results this morning," he began, though they were merely a formality. "And?" she prompted, though the answer was sitting between them, chattering about his latest drawing. "He's mine," Thaelio said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "Which brings me to my proposal." Here it comes, Xaviana thought. Lawyers, custody arrangements, child support that would help financially, but come with strings she wasn't sure she could accept. "I'd like you and Aziel to consider moving into my guest house," Thaelio said, surprising her completely. "It's separate from the main residence, with its own entrance, 3 bedrooms, fully furnished. It would give us a chance to establish a co-parenting relationship in a way that's stable for Aziel, while respecting your independence." Xaviana's instinct was immediate rejection. "We're fine where we are." "Are you?" he challenged gently. "I've seen the neighborhood, Xaviana. The security concerns alone. We've managed for years without your protection," she cut in, pride stiffening her spine. Thaelio sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. "This isn't about charity. It's about Aziel having consistent access to both parents while we figure this out. And it's temporary, 6 months, with no obligations beyond that." Before she could respond, Aziel tugged at her sleeve. "Can we, Mama? Please? Daddy says there's a pool and trees to climb." She shot Thaelio a look that clearly said, "You shouldn't have told him that." He had the grace to appear slightly abashed. "It's also closer to the cultural center where they offer those music classes you mentioned Aziel loves," he added, clearly having done his research. "And you'd have a dedicated space for your piano and recording equipment." The mention of music, her perpetually deferred dream, struck a nerve. Her current apartment barely accommodated her second-hand upright, and neighbors complained whenever she practiced. "I have a lease," she said, grasping for practical objections. "Which I'm happy to settle," Thaelio countered smoothly. No strings attached. If you hate the arrangement, you can leave any time. Xaviana stared into her coffee, aware that Aziel was watching them both with nervous anticipation. The practical benefits were undeniable: safety, space, proximity to, opportunities for both her and Aziel. But the emotional complications of living so close to Thylio, of allowing him into their carefully constructed world, terrified her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Why not just set up visitation like normal divorced parents?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or determination. "Because we're not divorced parents. We're two people who shared something extraordinary, were separated by circumstances beyond our control, and now have a child connecting us for life. I've missed 4 years already, Xaviana. I don't want to miss another day." The raw honesty in his voice shook her. This wasn't about control or ownership. It was about a father desperate to know his son. 3 months, she counted, surprising herself. "We try it for 3 months. I pay a fair rent." "That's not necessary," he interrupted. "It is to me," she insisted, "and Aziel and I maintain our regular routines. This isn't about changing our lives to fit yours. It's about finding common ground." Thylio studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Agreed, with one condition." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You let me hear you sing." "Really, sing. Not just lullabies to Aziel or cafe performances. I remember fragments from that night. Your voice was what I heard first when I was coming back to consciousness." He'd flooded Xaviana's cheeks at the unexpected request and the memory it evoked. "That's your condition?" He nodded, completely serious. "Music is clearly your passion. I want to understand that part of you." Before she could respond, Aziel clapped his hands. "Mama's songs make the sad go away," he informed Thylio with childlike certainty. "They'll fix your broken memories." The innocence of his statement hung in the air between them, laden with a truth neither adult was ready to confront. Xaviana felt something shift in her resolve, recognizing that her resistance wasn't just about protecting Aziel anymore. It was about protecting herself from the vulnerability Thylio awakened in her. "All right," she agreed finally. "We'll try your arrangement, but I'm signing a formal agreement with clear terms." Relief washed over Thylio's features, quickly masked by a more neutral expression. "I'd expect nothing less." He reached for his phone. "When would you like to see the place?" "Shouldn't we finish our drinks first?" Xaviana asked, amused despite herself by his eagerness. "We can bring them," he suggested, the flash of boyish enthusiasm so at odds with his usual controlled demeanor that she found herself smiling. "Now, Mama," Aziel chimed in, already sliding from his chair. "I want to see my new room." "It might not be our new place," she cautioned him, though she knew her resolve was weakening. "We're just looking." But as Thylio held the cafe door open for them, his hand briefly, tentatively touching the small of her back, Xaviana knew she was stepping into something that would change all their lives. What terrified her most wasn't the possibility of failure, but the whisper of hope she couldn't quite silence. Hope that perhaps the connection they'd shared that night wasn't merely a beautiful aberration, but the beginning of something that had been interrupted rather than concluded. The drive to Thylio's estate took them out of the city to an area of rolling hills and gated properties. Xaviana grew increasingly tense as the scenery changed, the disparity between their worlds becoming painfully obvious. When they turned into a long driveway bordered by ancient oak trees, Aziel pressed his face to the window in wonder. "You live here," he breathed. "We live here," Thylio corrected gently, his eyes meeting Xaviana's in the rearview mirror. "All of us, if your mother approves." The main house came into view, a tasteful stone mansion that managed to appear welcoming rather than ostentatious. Thylio drove past it, following a curving path to a smaller building set among gardens. "The guest house," he explained. "Originally the caretaker's cottage, but I had it renovated last year." It was charming, Xaviana had to admit, a two-story structure with large windows and a wraparound porch. Nothing like the utilitarian apartment building she was accustomed to. Aziel was out of the car almost before it stopped, his excitement palpable. "Slow down," Xaviana called, her maternal instincts overriding her apprehension. "Let me show you around," Thaelio offered, unlocking the front door. The interior was both more and less intimidating than Xaviana had feared. Beautifully appointed, but comfortably furnished, with none of the sterile perfection she'd expected from a wealthy bachelor. The living area flowed into an open kitchen with state-of-the-art appliances, while large windows showcased the surrounding. "Gardens. There's a bedroom and office downstairs," Thaelio explained, his watchful gaze tracking her reactions. "2 more bedrooms upstairs. I thought Aziel might like the one overlooking the pool." On cue, Aziel spotted the swimming pool through the window and let out a whoop of delight. "Can I go see, please?" "In a minute, baby," Xaviana promised, trying to maintain some semblance of parental authority despite the dizzying circumstances. "Let's see the rest of the house first." As they toured the space, Xaviana found herself imagining their life here, Aziel having room to play, herself having dedicated space for music, the safety of a gated property. It was everything she'd worked for but hadn't been able to provide. The final room, Thaelio showed them, sealed her decision. A sunlit space with perfect acoustics, housing a baby grand piano that made her second-hand upright look like a toy. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "No one's played it in years." Drawn by an irresistible pull, Xaviana approached the instrument, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The rich tone that emerged was pure, perfectly maintained despite its disuse. "Play something, Mama," Aziel urged, sensing the moment's importance. Xaviana hesitated, feeling Thaelio's intense gaze. Then, making her decision, she sat and began to play. Not one of her usual performance pieces, but the haunting melody she'd composed during those first months after Thaelio disappeared, when pregnancy and heartache had twisted together into something both painful and beautiful. The music filled the room, raw and honest, in a way words could never be. When she finally looked up, Thaelio was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Recognition mingled with something deeper, more dangerous. "That's the song from my dreams," he said, his voice barely audible. "The one I could never quite remember when I woke." The implication hung between them, that their connection had transcended physical separation, that some part of him had carried her music even when he couldn't remember her face. Zeal, oblivious to the charged moment between the adults, clapped enthusiastically. "Can we stay here, Mama? Please?" Xaviana took a deep breath, knowing her decision was made. "Yes," she said, looking directly at Thaelio. "We'll try." The smile that transformed his face made her breath catch, the same unguarded joy she'd glimpsed when he looked at their son. In that moment, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been fighting since seeing him again, that despite everything, despite logic and self-preservation, something about Thaelio Westbrook called to her on a level she didn't fully understand. As Aziel dashed off to explore the yard, Thaelio approached her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving us this chance." His nearness awakened sensory memories she'd tried to suppress. The scent of him, the precise shade of his eyes in sunlight, the way his presence seemed to fill any space he occupied. 3 months, she reminded him, needing to establish boundaries as much for herself as for him. No pressure, no expectations beyond co-parenting. "Agreed," he said solemnly, though something in his eyes suggested he knew as well as she did that pretending their connection was solely about Aziel was a fiction neither of them quite believed. "Welcome home, Xaviana." The words settled around her like a promise, or perhaps a warning, because despite all her rational objections, despite the walls she'd built around her heart, standing in this beautiful room with the father of her child, Xaviana couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something both terrifying and inevitable. A story that had begun 5 years ago in rain and darkness, and was only now finding its way into the light. Chapter 5. Walls Crumbling. 3 weeks into their new living arrangement, Xaviana had settled into an uneasy routine. The guest house was undeniably beautiful and comfortable beyond anything she'd known, but the sense of being a visitor in someone else's life lingered. Each morning she woke early to prepare Aziel for daycare, insisting on maintaining his regular schedule despite Tylio's offers of private tutors before heading to her part-time job at a local music store. Evenings were spent in a careful dance of co-parenting, with Tylio joining them for dinner more often than not. Tonight, rain pattered against the windows as Xaviana finished cleaning the kitchen. Aziel had long since fallen asleep after an exhausting day of swimming with his father. She moved to the piano, drawn as always to music when emotions became too complex for words. Her fingers found the keys without conscious thought. A melancholy melody emerging that matched the weather's mood. "That's beautiful," Tylio's voice came from the doorway, startling her. "Yours?" Xaviana nodded, not stopping her playing but watching as he entered the room, raindrops glistening in his dark hair. He must have walked from the main house without an umbrella. "You're soaked," she observed. He shrugged, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Worth it to hear you play." He settled into an armchair nearby, his presence both unsettling and oddly familiar. "You never performed that one publicly." It wasn't a question, but Xaviana answered anyway. "Some pieces are too personal. Like the one from that first day here," he said softly. "The one from my dreams." Xaviana's fingers faltered momentarily before continuing. "I wrote that when I was carrying Aziel," she admitted, "during those first months when everything was uncertain." Tylio was silent for a long moment, watching her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Do you know what I remember most clearly from that night?" he asked finally. Her heart quickened, but she kept her tone light. "I would have thought nothing, given your condition." "Not nothing," he said, leaning forward. "Fragments. The way you said my name, like it was something precious, how your hands felt against my skin, and your voice singing something soft when you thought I was asleep." Heat rose to Xaviana's cheeks. "You were delirious, hardly reliable memories. Then why do they feel more real than most of my life before or since?" The rawness in his question hung between them. Xaviana stopped playing, the sudden silence heavy, with unspoken possibilities. "Tylio, I'm not trying to pressure you," he said quickly. "I respect the boundaries you've set. I just—" He ran a hand through his damp hair. "These 3 weeks, watching you with Aziel, seeing how extraordinary you are, it's made me wonder what might have been if circumstances had been different." The vulnerability in his admission caught her off guard. This powerful, controlled man who commanded rooms with his mere presence was laying bare his thoughts without pretense. "We can't rewrite the past," she said gently. "No," he agreed, "but we're writing the present, aren't we? And maybe the future." Before she could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost instantly by a tremendous crack of thunder. Seconds later, Aziel's frightened cry drifted down from upstairs. Both parents moved simultaneously, a natural instinct, neither questioned. They found Aziel sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "The sky is angry," he whimpered as Xaviana gathered him close. "It's just a storm, little star," she soothed. "Nothing to be afraid of." Tylio sat on the edge of the bed, his large hand gentle as he stroked his son's hair. When I was your age, I used to hide under the covers during storms, he confided, until my grandfather taught me a trick. Aziel looked up, tears momentarily forgotten. What trick? He showed me how to count between the lightning and thunder. Thalio explained. The more seconds between them, the further away the storm is, so you can track it moving away. It was such a simple, fatherly thing, the sharing of wisdom from one generation to the next, but it struck Xaviana with unexpected force. This was what Aziel had been missing, what she couldn't provide alone, no matter how hard she tried. They spent the next half hour counting together, Aziel gradually relaxing as the storm indeed moved farther away. When he finally drifted back to sleep, his small hand clutched in his father's. The sight made Xaviana's throat tighten with emotion. Quietly, they slipped from the room, leaving the door ajar in case he woke again. In the hallway, Thalio stopped, turning to her with an expression that made her heart race. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For raising him to be so open-hearted," he replied. "After everything you've been through, you could have taught him to be guarded, suspicious. Instead, he loves so freely." The simple observation pierced through Xaviana's carefully maintained defenses. All the struggles, the sacrifices, the nights she'd questioned whether she was doing enough, all of it recognized in those few words. "I tried," she whispered, emotion suddenly overwhelming her. "Every day, I tried to make sure he never felt the emptiness I grew up with." Thalio's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "You succeeded beyond measure." The tenderness in his voice undid her completely. Tears she'd held back for years spilled over, and without hesitation, Thalio pulled her into his arms. She should have resisted, maintained the careful distance she'd established, but instead, she found herself clinging to him, face pressed against his still damp shirt as years of solitary struggle finally found release. "I was so scared," she confessed against his chest. "Finding out I was pregnant, losing my job, having no one to turn to. There were days I didn't know how we'd eat." His arms tightened around her, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "I should have been there," he said, voice rough, with emotion. "I should have found you." "How could you have?" she asked, looking up at him. Neither of us knew what we'd lost. The truth of it hung between them. Two souls connected by a single night of vulnerability, torn apart by circumstance rather than choice, now finding their way back to one another through the child they'd created. Thalio's gaze dropped to her lips, his intent clear in the sudden darkening of his eyes. Xaviana knew she should step away, maintain the boundaries she'd insisted upon. Instead, she found herself rising on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like the desperate passion of their first night together. This was slower, deeper, laden with 5 years of unknowing absence and 3 weeks of growing awareness. His hands cradled her face with reverent care, as if she might shatter beneath his touch. Hers clutched at his shirt, anchoring herself against the tide of sensation threatening to overwhelm her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Thalio rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you at the festival," he admitted. "This complicates everything," she whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Life is complicated," he countered with a small smile. "Feelings rarely follow the neat boundaries we try to set for them." The simple truth of this struck Xaviana forcefully. She had been fighting not just her attraction to Thalio, but the possibility that what they'd shared that night wasn't merely circumstantial, that perhaps their souls had recognized something in each other that transcended their brief acquaintance. "I'm scared," she admitted, the confession pulled from somewhere deep within her. "Not of you, but of what you make me feel. I've been self-sufficient for so long." "And you still are," he assured her, brushing hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Needing someone doesn't diminish your strength, Xaviana." Another crack of thunder, more distant now, punctuated his words. The storm was passing, but something inside Xaviana was just beginning to break open. The walls she'd built around her heart, developing hairline fractures she wasn't sure could be repaired. "Stay," she whispered, surprising herself with the invitation. "Not for... I just don't want to be alone tonight." Understanding flooded his eyes. Without a word, he took her hand, leading her downstairs to the living room, where the soft glow of a single lamp created a haven against the storm still raging outside. They settled on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders, her head finding that perfect spot against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "Tell me about your past," she said quietly. "The real story, not the polished version." Thailio was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her shoulder. "It's not a happy tale," he warned. "Few of the true ones are," she replied. He took a deep breath. "My father was wealthy but cruel, a man who saw people as assets or liabilities, nothing in between. My mother was his third wife, much younger, beautiful but fragile. She left when I was 4, just disappeared one night. My father told everyone she died in an accident." "Did she?" Xaviana asked softly. Thailio's laugh held no humor. "No. I found her when I was 22, living in Paris, remarried with 2 daughters who knew nothing about me. She'd chosen freedom over her first child." The matter-of-fact way he delivered this devastating revelation broke Xaviana's heart. "I'm so sorry," he shrugged, the gesture at odds with the pain evident in his eyes. "My father made sure I understood. I was unwanted, a disappointment who'd failed to keep my mother interested in staying. Every achievement was met with criticism, every failure with contempt. When he died 10 years ago, his final words to me were that at least I'd proven competent enough not to squander his legacy." "That's not a father," Xaviana said fiercely. "That's a tyrant." "Yes," Thailio agreed simply, "which is why finding Aziel terrifies me as much as it elates me. What if I carry that poison within me? What if I don't know how to be the father he deserves?" The vulnerability in his admission stunned her. This successful, powerful man harbored the same insecurities she did, the fear of repeating the patterns that had wounded them. "I've watched you with him," she said, shifting to look directly into his eyes. "You're nothing like your father. The way you listen to Aziel, the patience you show, how you get down on his level to talk to him, those aren't things you learn, they come from your heart." Something in Thailio's expression cracked open at her words. Relief mingled with a gratitude, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Without speaking, he pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her forehead in a gesture of such tenderness that Xaviana felt tears threatening again. They talked through the night, exchanging the stories that had shaped them, her childhood bouncing between foster homes after her grandmother's disappearance, his isolated youth in boarding schools and under the care of disinterested staff. They spoke of dreams deferred, her music, his secret passion for architecture suppressed by his father's insistence he follow the family path in finance. As dawn began to lighten the sky, they had mapped each other's souls in ways more intimate than physical connection could achieve. Xaviana had fallen asleep against his chest, his steady heartbeat the most comforting lullaby she'd known. When she woke, sunlight streamed through the windows, and Thailio watched her with a soft smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Good morning," he said, voice husky from the night of talking. Before she could respond, the patter of small feet announced Aziel's approach. He skidded into the living room, eyes widening at the sight of both parents together. "Did you have a sleepover?" he asked delightedly. Xaviana sat up quickly, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene must appear. "Your father helped me feel better during the storm," she explained, cheeks warming. Aziel nodded sagely. Like how you stay with me when I'm scared. Grown-ups get scared too. The simple wisdom of children, Xaviana thought, watching as Tailio scooped Aziel into his arms, tickling him until giggles filled the room. The morning light illuminated them both, father and son, so alike in their expressions of joy, in the way laughter transformed their features. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably within her. The careful walls she'd constructed to protect herself from hope, from dependence, from the possibility of abandonment, didn't come crashing down in a dramatic collapse. Instead, they simply ceased to feel necessary, like an umbrella no longer needed when the rain has stopped. Later, as they prepared breakfast together in an unexpected harmony, Tailio caught her hand as she passed him. "Last night changes things," he said quietly, making it a statement rather than a question. Xaviana looked at their joined hands, then at Aziel, happily arranging berries into smiley faces on his pancakes. "Yes," she admitted, "but we go slowly. For Aziel's sake, and our own." Thalio's smile held understanding and something more, a patience that suggested he'd wait however long she needed. "We have time," he assured her, "all the time in the world to get this right." Standing in the sunlit kitchen with the two people who had come to mean everything to her, one she'd raised and protected since birth, the other she was only beginning to truly know, Xaviana allowed herself to believe him. Perhaps the greatest act of courage wasn't building walls to keep pain at bay, but allowing them to crumble so that love could find its way in. Chapter 6. The Other Woman. The morning sunlight streamed through the guesthouse windows, painting golden patterns across the kitchen table, where Xaviana sat with her coffee, watching Aziel arrange his cereal into meticulous patterns before eating it. 2 months into their new living arrangement, she'd settled into a cautious rhythm with Thalio, co-parenting with growing ease, sharing quiet evenings after Aziel's bedtime, and carefully navigating the deepening attraction neither could deny. The previous night, they'd shared another milestone, introducing Aziel to the idea that his parents were more than just friendly caretakers. The memory of her son's delighted response, "Does that mean you're going to kiss like in the movies?" brought a smile to her face. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she spotted an unfamiliar silver sports car pulling up the main house driveway, sleek, European, and unmistakably expensive. "Mama, can I go swimming with Daddy today?" Aziel asked, oblivious to her sudden tension. "Finish your breakfast first, little star," she replied, keeping her voice light despite the unease creeping through her. Something about that car, arriving unannounced on a Saturday morning, triggered her protective instincts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thalio. "Unexpected visitor. Nothing to worry about. We'll explain later." The brevity and timing only heightened her concern. Before she could respond, Aziel pointed excitedly out the window. "Look, Mama, a pretty lady is talking to Daddy." Xaviana followed his gaze to see Thalio standing on the main house terrace, with a woman whose elegant posture and designer outfit screamed privilege. Even from a distance, Xaviana could see she was stunning. Tall, slender, with perfectly styled platinum hair that caught the morning light. "Can we go say hi?" Aziel was already sliding from his chair. "Not right now, baby," Xaviana said, more sharply than intended. Softening her tone, she added, "Daddy seems busy with his guest. Let's give them some space." But Aziel, with a child's uncanny timing, had already spotted them through the window. He waved enthusiastically, drawing both adults' attention. Thalio raised a hand in acknowledgement, his posture visibly stiffening as he said something to his companion. The blonde woman turned, her gaze finding the guest house with an expression Xaviana couldn't quite discern at this distance. Curiosity, perhaps, or something less benign. "She's looking at us, Mama," Aziel observed, fascinated by the glamorous stranger. Xaviana busied herself clearing breakfast dishes, ignoring the knot forming in her stomach. She'd known Tylio's world would eventually intrude on the bubble they'd created, but she hadn't anticipated how vulnerable it would make her feel. How the sight of a beautiful, polished woman from his sphere would resurrect every insecurity she'd fought to overcome. Her phone buzzed again. Her name is Marceline Everett, former colleague. Nothing to concern yourself with. The dismissive tone, so unlike Tylio's recent warmth, only increased her unease. Before she could decide how to respond, a knock at the door startled her. Taking a deep breath, she opened it to find Tylio, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he said formally, as if they hadn't spent the previous evening curled together on the sofa, sharing whispered confidences. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I was hoping Aziel might join me for breakfast at the main house." "He's already eaten," Xaviana replied, studying his face. "And who exactly is waiting for?" "You there?" Tylio glanced past her to where Aziel was gathering his swimming gear, clearly anticipating a day with his father, regardless of mysterious visitors. "Marceline is an old acquaintance," he said carefully. "She had some business documents that needed my immediate attention. On a Saturday morning, dressed like she's heading to a photo shoot?" Xaviana didn't bother masking her skepticism. Something flashed in Tylio's eyes. Discomfort, perhaps even guilt. "It's complicated," he admitted. "I'm ready, Daddy," Aziel announced, appearing beside Xaviana with his swim bag. Tylio's expression softened immediately. "Hey, champion. Actually, there's been a slight change of plans. I have a visitor who needs to discuss some boring grown-up things with me." "The pretty lady?" Aziel asked innocently. "She's wearing really shiny shoes." A reluctant smile touched Tylio's lips. "Yes, her shoes are quite impractical for a country visit." He glanced at Xaviana, a silent appeal in his eyes. "Perhaps you and your mother could join us for lunch later. I should be finished by noon." Before Xaviana could respond, a melodious voice called from behind Tylio. "Darling, are you planning to make me wait all morning?" Marceline Everett stood on the garden path, even more stunning up close. Her expertly made-up face held a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she appraised first Xaviana, then Aziel. "So this is your situation," she said, the pause before the last word laden with meaning. "How charming." Xaviana felt her spine stiffen, maternal instinct overriding her personal insecurities. "And you are Marceline Everett," the woman replied, extending a manicured hand. "Tylio and I go way back, don't we, darling? In fact, we had quite the understanding before his mysterious disappearance a few years ago." The implication hung in the air between them. Tylio's jaw tightened. "Marceline, this isn't appropriate." "Oh, but isn't it?" she interrupted smoothly. "I think your little family deserves to know. After all, secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they?" Her gaze fell to Aziel, who was watching the exchange with growing confusion. "You're a handsome little man, aren't you? Such unusual eyes, quite striking." The proprietary way she examined Aziel sent a chill through Xaviana. Before she could respond, Tylio stepped between them, his back to Marceline, as he addressed Xaviana. "Take Aziel inside," he said quietly. "This isn't a conversation for him to hear. I'll handle this and come find you later." The authority in his tone, once so similar to the dismissive way wealthy men had always spoken to her, now held something different, a protective edge that was less about control than concern. She nodded slightly, guiding Aziel back into the house despite his protests about missing swimming. Through the window, she watched Tylio lead Marceline toward the main house, their body language tense. The woman's hand came to rest possessively on his arm, a gesture that spoke of history and intimacy. "Who is that lady, Mama?" Aziel asked, pressing his face to the glass beside her. "Is she Daddy's friend?" I'm not sure, baby, Xaviana answered, honestly, but I think she might be someone from Daddy's past. The morning stretched interminably. Xaviana tried to distract herself and Aziel with games and stories, but her thoughts kept returning to Marceline's insinuations. Had she and Thylio been involved before that fateful night? Was there an understanding that his amnesia had conveniently erased? Just before noon, a soft knock announced Thylio's return. He looked weary, his usual composed demeanor fractured around the edges. "She's gone," he said simply when Xaviana opened the door. "May I come in?" Aziel, who had been napping after a morning of restless energy, was still asleep. Xaviana led Thylio to the kitchen, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I believe I'm owed an explanation," she said quietly. Thylio ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. "Marceline and I dated briefly about 6 years ago. It was never serious, at least not on my part, but apparently she had other expectations. The night we met," Xaviana began, "we were already over," he assured her quickly, "months before. But when I disappeared, and then returned with partial memory loss, she saw an opportunity. My father's company was in transition after his death, and my position was valuable to someone with ambition." Xaviana studied his face, searching for signs of deception. And now, why has she suddenly appeared after all this time? Thylio's expression darkened. "She claims to have information about my past, specifically about the night we met. She suggested there are inconsistencies in your story. Ice formed in Xaviana's veins." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "She says there's evidence you knew exactly who I was that night," he said reluctantly. "That you deliberately put yourself in my path, knowing about my wealth and position." The accusation was so absurd that Xaviana almost laughed. Evidence? What possible evidence could exist for something that never happened? I was a waitress walking home in the rain who found an injured stranger. I didn't even know your last name until Aziel found you. "I know," Thylio said, reaching for her hand across the table, "but she claims to have documentation, photographs, financial records, showing unusual deposits to your account after we met." Xaviana jerked her hand away, anger replacing her initial shock. "And you believe this?" "Of course not," he said, but something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, however momentary, betrayed him. The realization struck her like a physical blow. After everything they'd shared, after the vulnerabilities she'd exposed, after letting him into her life and her son's heart, there was still a part of him that could entertain such a possibility. "You do," she whispered, rising from her chair. "Even after everything, some part of you wonders if I targeted you, if I planned to get pregnant, if this was all some elaborate scheme for financial gain. Xaviana, that's not—" He reached for her, but she stepped back. "What did she show you, Thylio? What was this supposed evidence that made you doubt me, even for a second?" He hesitated, then reluctantly withdrew an envelope from his jacket. "Bank statements showing deposits that coincide with the time we met. Photographs of you apparently following me before the accident." He pushed the envelope toward her. "I know they must be fabricated, but I needed to show you." Xaviana opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The bank statements showed deposits she'd never received, the account number similar to hers, but with 2 digits transposed. The photographs were even more disturbing. Grainy images of a woman with her build and coloring, face conveniently obscured, lingering near locations she recognized as high-end business districts she'd never frequented. "This is what you questioned me over?" she asked incredulously. "Photos that don't even show my face, and an account that isn't mine." "I didn't question you," Thylio protested. "I'm showing you because I trust you, because I want no secrets between us." "But you brought these to me with doubt in your eyes," she countered, feeling something precious cracking between them. "After I let you into our lives, after I began to believe we could be a family." You still harbor suspicions about my intentions." Thailio's expression shifted from defensive to remorseful. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "There was a moment, just a moment of doubt. Not because I don't trust you, but because I've spent my entire life surrounded by people with ulterior motives. It's a reflex I'm still unlearning." From the bedroom came the sound of Aziel stirring. Xaviana wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm day. "Our son is the most precious thing in my life," she said, her voice low but intense. "I would never use him as a pawn in some scheme. The fact that you could entertain that possibility, even briefly—" She shook her head, unable to continue. "Mama?" Aziel appeared in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and adorable. "Is it lunchtime?" The normalcy of the question, so at odds with the emotional chasm widening between his parents, brought tears to Xaviana's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, little star. Why don't you wash your hands while I get it ready?" Thailio watched her move around the kitchen, the distance between them suddenly greater than the physical space. "Xaviana, please," he said quietly. "Don't shut me out over this." "I'm not shutting you out," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." Aziel's return prevented further discussion, his excited chatter about swimming plans creating a veneer of normalcy over the tension. Thailio participated in the conversation, answering his son's questions with forced enthusiasm, while his gaze repeatedly sought Xaviana's averted face. After lunch, Aziel's pleas for swimming finally wore down Xaviana's resistance. She agreed to let him go with Thailio to the pool, needing time alone to process the morning's revelations. As they left, Thailio paused in the doorway. "I've arranged for a full background check on Marceline," he said, "and I've already confirmed those aren't your actual bank records. By the time they return from swimming, I'll have proof that everything she presented was fabricated." "That's not the point," Xaviana said softly. "The issue isn't the evidence. It's that for even a moment you could believe I would do something so calculated with our son's life." Thailio's expression reflected genuine anguish. "I don't believe it," he insisted. "But I needed to be completely transparent with you, to show you what she's trying to do." "I appreciate the transparency," Xaviana acknowledged, "but I need time to think." As they walked away, Aziel's excited voice drifted back to her. "Daddy, is that lady your girlfriend?" "No." Thailio's firm response carried clearly. "She's someone who wanted to hurt people I love, but I won't let her." Alone in the guest house, Xaviana found herself drawn to the piano. Her fingers moved over the keys, finding a melody that expressed what words could not. The fear of trusting too completely. The pain of doubt from the one person who should believe in her without question. The lingering insecurity that she would never truly belong in Thailio's world. Hours later, a sunset painted the sky in shades of amber that matched Thailio's eyes. Her phone chimed with a message. "Security footage from my office building proves Marceline doctored those photos. The bank has confirmed the account was opened 2 months ago using stolen information. She's been warned to leave us alone or face legal consequences." The evidence of his efforts to protect them should have been reassuring. Instead, it only highlighted the fundamental imbalance in their relationship, his access to resources, information, and power that she could never match. In his world, problems could be solved with money and influence, while in hers, they had to be weathered with resilience and faith. When Thailio returned with an exhausted Aziel, she had composed herself enough to maintain a calm facade. Their son, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents, chattered about their swimming adventures before falling asleep almost immediately after dinner. In the quiet that followed, Thailio approached her cautiously. "I've hurt you," he said simply, and I would give anything to take back that moment of doubt. The raw sincerity in his voice weakened her resolve to maintain distance. I understand it's hard to unlearn a lifetime of suspicion, she conceded. But Thalio, if we're going to build something real, you have to truly believe in me, not just when it's easy, but even when someone presents you with what looks like evidence to the contrary. I do believe in you, he insisted, moving closer. More than I've ever believed in anyone. That's why I showed you what Marceline brought, because I knew you deserved complete honesty, even about my momentary lapse. Xaviana studied his face, seeing the genuine remorse there. She'll try again, she said quietly. Or someone else will. Your world is full of people who won't understand or accept what we have. Let them try, he replied, his voice gaining intensity. Nothing and no one will come between us unless we allow it. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative. Can you forgive me? The question hung between them, weighted with more than just this single transgression, with the acknowledgement that their different backgrounds and experiences would create misunderstandings, that trust would be an ongoing choice rather than a static condition. I'm trying, she answered honestly. But Thalio, doubt is like a stone dropped in water. The ripples continue long after the initial impact. He nodded, accepting her response without pushing for more. Then I'll spend however long it takes proving myself worthy of your trust. Again, as he prepared to leave for the main house, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his movements, Xaviana felt the first tiny fissure in her protective anger. His willingness to respect her need for space, to acknowledge his mistake without excuses, spoke of a man genuinely committed to growth rather than control. Stay, she said impulsively as he reached the door. Not, she hesitated, not like before, but Aziel would want you here in the morning, and I don't want Marceline's poison to drive us further apart. Relief washed over Thalio's features. I'll take the sofa, he offered immediately. Their cautious dance around each other that night, sharing the same space while maintaining emotional distance, was a step backward from the intimacy they'd begun to build. Yet Xaviana recognized something important in this setback. Relationships weren't linear journeys, but complex landscapes of advance and retreat, trust given and sometimes temporarily withdrawn. Growth that came from healing breaches rather than avoiding them entirely. As she lay in bed, listening to Thalio's restless movements in the living room, she acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. Their greatest challenge wasn't Marceline or any external threat, but the shadows of their own pasts that occasionally resurface, testing the foundation they were building together. The question wasn't whether such tests would come again, but whether each time they would choose to rebuild stronger than before. In the darkness, her hand found the pendant Thalio had given her weeks earlier, a simple silver music note that, he'd said, reminded him of her voice even when memory failed him. The cool metal against her palm felt like a promise, not of perfection, but of persistence, the shared determination to create harmony from the disparate melodies of their lives, even when discord temporarily intervened. Chapter 7. Desperate. Measures. The early morning light filtered through the curtains as Xaviana moved silently through the guest house, tucking essential items into a single suitcase. Elziel's favorite stuffed bear, his medicine, enough clothes for a week. Her fingers trembled as she wrote the note she would leave for Thalio, tears threatening to spill, but stubbornly held back. I need time to think. Please don't try to find. Us we're safe. I'll contact you when I'm ready. She set it on the piano, the place he would look first. 3 days had passed since Thalio had questioned Aziel's paternity based on Talia's poisonous evidence. 3 days of polite, distant interactions that felt like physical pain after the closeness they'd begun to share. Though he'd apologized repeatedly, the doubt in his eyes had shattered something fundamental between them. If he could believe she'd orchestrated their meeting, planned a pregnancy for financial gain, how could she ever fully trust him with her heart? Adziel stirred as she gently woke him, blinking in confusion at the early hour. "Are we going on an adventure, Mama?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "A little trip," she confirmed, helping him into warm clothes. "Just you and me to visit somewhere. Special. Is Daddy coming?" The innocent question pierced her heart. "Not this time, baby. It's a surprise for when we come back." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't bear to tell him they were leaving without saying goodbye. The taxi arrived. At 5:30 a.m., headlights cutting through the lingering darkness. As they drove away from the estate that had briefly felt like home, Xaviana refused to look back. Only when they reached the bus station did she allow herself a moment of doubt. Was she overreacting? Should she have stayed to fight for what they'd begun to build? But the memory of Thaelio's face as he'd confronted her, that momentary belief that she could be so calculating, so deceitful, strengthened her resolve. She'd spent her life being misjudged, underestimated, suspected because of her background and skin color. From anyone else, such assumptions were painful but expected. From him, they were unbearable. The bus journey to her hometown took 8 hours, Adziel mercifully sleeping through most of it. Xaviana stared out the window, watching landscapes change from manicured suburbs to rolling countryside, each mile increasing the hollow ache in her chest. By late afternoon, they arrived in the small coastal town where she'd spent her early childhood before being thrust into foster care. Jasmine, her one childhood friend who'd managed to stay in touch through the system, met them at the station. Her genuine delight at seeing Adziel helped mask the awkwardness of Xaviana's unexpected arrival. "You can stay as long as you need," Jasmine assured her that evening after Adziel had been tucked into the fold-out sofa. "Though I have to ask, are you running from something or someone?" Xaviana sighed, cradling a mug of tea between her hands. "It's complicated. It's the father, isn't it?" Adziel's been talking about his daddy all evening. Jasmine's perception had always been unnervingly accurate. "He found us," Xaviana confirmed. "Or rather, Adziel found him. It's been intense." "Good intense or bad intense?" Jasmine pressed. Memories flooded Xaviana's mind. Thaelio's gentle patience with Adziel, his touch when they'd finally surrendered to the attraction between them, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd shared his darkest fears about fatherhood. "Both," she admitted softly. "He's everything I never dared hope for, which makes his doubt all the more devastating." Jasmine squeezed her hand. "People make mistakes when they're afraid of losing something precious, especially men who've never had anything worth losing before." The simple wisdom in her friend's words followed Xaviana into uneasy dreams. She woke to rain, drumming against the windows, a sound that instantly transported her back to that first night with Thaelio. The ache of missing him was physical, a hollow space beneath her ribs that no amount of rationalization could fill. The festival that had brought Jasmine's small seafood restaurant modest local fame was in full swing despite the weather, forcing Xaviana to help with the rush of customers. She worked mechanically, grateful for the distraction, while Adziel played contentedly with Jasmine's daughter in a corner of the kitchen. By evening, the rain had intensified into a proper storm. Xaviana stepped outside during a brief lull in customers, letting the cool droplets wash over her face, cleansing away the confusion and hurt that had driven her from Thaelio's home. "You always did love the rain." The voice, deep, slightly rough, achingly familiar, froze her in place. Slowly, she turned to find Thaelio standing a few feet away, soaked to the skin, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled from what must have been hours of travel. "How did you find us?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Your note was on the piano," he said simply. "The same piano where you played the melody from my dreams." I remembered you mentioned this town once, where your grandmother raised you. The rest was just persistence. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I drove all night, checked every hotel, every rental property. I was about to give up when I saw you through the restaurant window. Xaviana rapped, her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. I needed space to think. You needed to run from the hurt I caused, he corrected gently. I don't blame you, but I couldn't let you disappear again, not without fighting for what we've found. A flash of lightning illuminated his face, revealing the raw emotion he no longer attempted to conceal. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My money, my influence, my name. The one time I find someone who wants nothing but me, exactly as I am, flawed and damaged and struggling to be worthy of her, I let fear and suspicion poison it. Why should I believe you now? Xaviana challenged, even as her heart raced traitorously at his words. Instead of answering immediately, Thylio reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal not a ring, as she'd momentarily feared, but a delicate locket. This belonged to my grandmother, the only person who ever showed me unconditional love before you and Aziel, he said, voice rough with emotion. Inside is a sketch she drew of my grandfather, the love of her life. They met when she was a housemaid in his family's home, with nothing to offer but herself. He held it out to her, rain streaming down his face. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I see you, truly see you, Xaviana. Not what you can give me or what role you play in my life, but you in your entirety, with all your strength and vulnerability and extraordinary heart. The rain fell harder around them, creating a private world where only truth could exist. Xaviana took a step toward him, then another, until she could see the desperate hope in his eyes. I was so hurt, she admitted quietly. I know, and I will spend however long it takes making that right. His hand, still holding the locket, trembled slightly. Please come home. Not to the guest house, that was always temporary. Home to wherever the three of us can be together on equal footing. Something in his words, the humility, the recognition of her need for independence, even within their relationship, broke through the last of Xaviana's resistance. She closed the distance between them, her hands rising to frame his face. I was happiest singing in the rain, she whispered, echoing the words he'd spoken feverishly that first night. But only when someone truly heard the music. Understanding dawned in his eyes. She was offering forgiveness, acceptance, a path forward. With reverent care, he slipped the chain around her neck, the locket settling against her heart. Then, as if he could no longer contain himself, he pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not: desperation, relief, passion, and most of all, a love that had survived separation, misunderstanding, and their own fears. Inside the restaurant, Aziel's excited cry of "Daddy!" reached them moments before the child burst through the door and launched himself at Thylio's legs. Without breaking his embrace with Xaviana, Thylio lifted his son with one arm, completing the circle. As the three of them stood entwined in the pouring rain, much like the storm that had first brought Xaviana and Thylio together, the music that had haunted his dreams and guided him back to her seemed to surround them, washing away doubt and pain, leaving only the promise of a love strong enough to weather any storm. Chapter 8. The Truth Revealed. 2 days after their emotional reunion, in the rain, Xaviana stood at the window of Jasmine's spare bedroom, watching Thylio and Aziel build a sandcastle on the beach. The sight of them together, Thylio's patient hands, guiding their son's smaller ones, their identical profiles bent in concentration, still took her breath away. They had decided to stay in the coastal town for a few more days. The distance, from their normal lives, creating a space for healing and reconnection. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Festival crowd arriving. Could use extra hands if you're free. Xaviana smiled, grateful for her friend's generosity in both providing shelter and allowing her to contribute. She'd spent the previous evening singing at the seafood festival, drawing larger crowds than Jasmine's restaurant had seen before. "Thaelio," she called from the porch, "I'm going to help Jasmine for a few hours." He looked up, shielding his eyes against the sun, and nodded. She still marveled at how naturally they'd fallen into co-parenting, as if the years of separation had never happened. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments of awkwardness, of uncertainty, but the foundation felt unshakable now. The restaurant was already bustling when she arrived, tourists drawn by the annual festival mixing with locals. Xaviana tied an apron around her waist and joined the organized chaos of the kitchen, losing herself in the rhythm of service. "Table 7's been asking about last night's singer," Jasmine told her during a brief lull. "Apparently some music producer on vacation. Said your voice is commercially viable with the right packaging." She rolled her eyes at the industry jargon. Xaviana laughed, though her heart skipped a beat at the thought. Before Aziel, before life had demanded practical choices over dreams, music had been her only goal. Now, with Thaelio's support, she'd begun to believe it might still be possible. "Should I be jealous?" Thaelio's voice came from behind her, making her turn in surprise. He stood in the kitchen doorway, Aziel perched on his shoulders. "We finished our castle, Mama," Aziel announced proudly. "It has a moat and everything." "That's wonderful, baby," she said, glancing questioningly at Thaelio. "Someone was hungry after all that architectural work," he explained with a smile. "We thought we'd surprise you." Jasmine seated them at a corner table while Xaviana finished her shift. Watching them through the kitchen pass through, she felt a surge of contentment so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. How strange that her impulsive flight had led to this deeper understanding between them. She was arranging a plate of oysters when Aziel's sudden cry pierced the restaurant's ambient noise. The plate clattered to the counter as she rushed toward their table, heart racing. She found Aziel doubled over, his small face contorted in pain, while Thaelio knelt beside him in obvious distress. "He just collapsed," Thaelio explained, his usual composure shattered. "Said his stomach hurts really bad." Xaviana pressed her hand to Aziel's forehead, finding it frighteningly hot. "We need to get him to a hospital, now." Jasmine appeared at her side. "The clinic's only 5 minutes away. Go, I'll call ahead." Thaelio gathered Aziel into his arms, the boy's whimpers of pain like physical blows to Xaviana's heart. The next hour passed in a blur of examination rooms, concerned medical faces, and the terrifying vocabulary of emergency medicine. Dehydration, appendicitis, elevated white blood cell count. "We need to transfer him to Memorial Hospital in the city," the clinic doctor finally announced. "Their pediatric surgical team can handle this better than we can." "Surgical," Xaviana repeated, her voice barely audible. The doctor nodded grimly. "His appendix shows signs of rupture. We've stabilized him for transport, but he needs surgery as soon as possible." Xaviana felt the floor tilt beneath her, Thaelio's arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. She'd faced many challenges as a single mother, but nothing had prepared her for this helpless terror. "I'll arrange for an immediate transfer," Thaelio said, his voice steadier than his expression. "No matter what it costs." But the doctor shook his head. "The ambulance service is backed up with a multi-car accident on the highway. It could be hours." "Hours he doesn't have," Thaelio said, already pulling out his phone. "I'll charter a helicopter." Xaviana watched in numb amazement as he made calls, his voice shifting from desperate father to commanding CEO as he arranged what seemed impossible in a small coastal town. Within 40 minutes, The distinctive sound of rotor blades announced the arrival of a medical transport helicopter on the clinic's rarely used helipad. As they prepared to board, Aziel, sedated but still conscious, reached for both their hands. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his golden eyes wide with fear. "Never," they promised in unison, the word carrying the weight of a vow. The flight to the city took just 30 minutes, but to Xaviana, watching her son's pale face as medical staff monitored his condition, it felt like an eternity. Thaelio never released her hand, his thumb tracing constant, comforting circles on her skin. "He's gonna be all right," he murmured, though she heard the uncertainty beneath his confident tone. "He's strong, like his mother." The surgeons were waiting when they landed, whisking Aziel away with efficient compassion that left Xaviana and Thaelio standing alone in a sterile hallway, suddenly bereft without their child between them. "Family of Aziel Rain?" A hospital administrator approached with clipboard in hand. "We need consent forms signed, and unfortunately, there's an issue. With insurance coverage for the helicopter transport, I'll cover all expenses," Thaelio interrupted. "Just tell me what needs to be signed to get my son the care he needs." "And you are?" the administrator asked, pen poised. "His father," Thaelio answered without hesitation, an edge to his voice that brooked no argument. "I don't see that listed." "In his records," the administrator said apologetically, "we'll need proof of paternity for you to sign medical consents." Xaviana felt Thaelio tense beside her, the memory of his earlier doubts about Aziel's paternity hanging between them. But when he spoke, his voice held nothing but certainty. "Run whatever tests you need. Take my blood, my DNA, anything. He is my son." His gaze locked with Xaviana's. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." As Xaviana signed the necessary forms, she felt something shift between them, a final barrier dissolving. The doubt that had driven her away now seemed like a distant shadow, burned away by the fierce, protective love Thaelio displayed for their child. The waiting room became their world for the next 3 hours, a purgatory of uncomfortable chairs, bad coffee, and the constant gnawing fear that parents throughout human history have known while waiting for news of their children. They spoke little, the need for words superseded by the comfort of simple presence. Finally, a surgeon appeared, still in scrubs, his expression revealing nothing until he spoke. "The surgery was successful. We removed the appendix before it fully ruptured. He'll need to stay for a few days, but barring complications, he should make a complete recovery." The relief was so intense that Xaviana's knees buckled. Thaelio caught her, his own body trembling as he held her. "Can we see him?" he asked, voice raw with emotion. "He's in recovery now. Once he's in a room, you can be with him. One of you can even stay overnight." "Both of us," Thaelio corrected firmly. "We'll both be staying." Something in his tone, perhaps the unmistakable authority or the depth of feeling, made the surgeon simply nod before leading them to a waiting area nearer to recovery. When they were finally allowed into Aziel's room, the sight of their son, small and vulnerable amid the medical equipment but breathing steadily, broke something open in both of them. Xaviana pressed her lips to his forehead, murmuring thanks to whatever forces had protected him, while Thaelio gripped his tiny hand as if it were a lifeline. They settled into the room, Xaviana in the single recliner, Thaelio improvising with chairs pushed together, neither willing to leave even briefly. As night deepened outside the window, Aziel slept peacefully under the influence of pain medication, his parents maintaining their vigil. "I never knew fear like this existed," Thaelio confessed quietly, his gaze never leaving their son's face. "The thought of losing him—" "It's the price of love," Xaviana replied softly, "the risk of that kind of loss." He reached across the bed, taking her hand. "Thank you for giving me the chance to know it. The fear, yes, but the love that makes the fear bearable." His eyes, when they finally met hers, held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I almost lost both of you because I couldn't trust what was right in front of me." "We found our way back," she reminded him. "Because you're braver than I am," he said simply, "brave enough to love despite having every reason not to trust." In the quiet of the hospital room, with their child breathing steadily between them, Tylio's confession and Xaviana's acceptance formed a covenant more binding than any legal document could express. Whatever came next, whether joy or hardship, they would face it together, their unshakable love for Aziel extending now to encompass each other. And when Aziel woke briefly in the night, finding both parents still at his bedside, his drowsy smile contained all the certainty of a child who had never doubted what the adults were only now discovering, that the three of them belonged together. A family united not by convention or convenience, but by the deepest bonds of love. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. The summer breeze carried the scent of hibiscus and salt water as Xaviana stepped onto the private beach. 2 weeks had passed since Aziel's hospitalization, and Tylio had surprised them with a visit to his secluded island retreat, a place he admitted he'd rarely used himself, preferring the constant motion of city life until now. She watched their son running along the shoreline, his recovery remarkably quick as children's often are. The surgical scar was healing well, soon to be nothing but a faint line and a dramatic story to tell his friends. Thalio trailed behind him, pointing out interesting shells and keeping a watchful eye that still held traces of the fear they'd shared in the hospital. The crisis had changed them all. Aziel seemed somehow older, more aware of the preciousness of the family they were building. Thalio had softened, his customary control giving way to a more present, emotionally available man who seemed to treasure each moment rather than plan for contingencies. And Xaviana, she had finally allowed herself to believe in the permanence of this unexpected happiness, to trust that Thalio would not disappear again by choice or by circumstance. "Mama!" Aziel called, waving excitedly. "Look what Daddy found!" She walked toward them, sand warm between her toes, letting the simple pleasure of the moment wash over her. Thalio met her gaze over their son's head, his smile creating that now familiar flutter in her chest. "A perfect sand dollar," he explained, placing the delicate disc in her palm, completely intact, which Aziel tells me is very rare. "Almost as rare as us," she replied softly, the double meaning clear in her eyes. Thalio's hand brushed hers as he took the sand dollar back, his touch lingering. "Why don't you go build that fortress we talked about?" he suggested to Aziel. "I want to talk to your mother for a minute." The boy nodded, already distracted by his architectural plans. They watched him run toward the collection of buckets and shovels waiting higher on the beach. "He's happy," Xaviana observed. "Happier than I've ever seen him." "Are you?" Thalio asked, his voice carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability that still surprised her. She considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Despite everything, or maybe because of it, I am." He took her hand, leading her toward the water's edge, where gentle waves lapped at their ankles. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over his features as he turned to face her. "These past weeks have shown me what matters," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the open beach. "When I thought we might lose Aziel, nothing else existed. Not my company, not my possessions, not my plans for the future. Just the desperate hope that our son would be okay and that you would still be beside me when the crisis passed." Xaviana felt tears threaten at the memory of those terrible hours. "We made it through." "We did," he agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "and I realized something I should have known from the beginning. The night we met wasn't chance. Zaviana, it wasn't a random encounter or a temporary connection broken by circumstances. What was it then? She asked, heart racing at the intensity in his gaze. The beginning of my real life, he said simply. Everything before was just preparation, learning the wrong lessons, making the wrong choices, becoming someone I thought I was supposed to be rather than who I actually am. He reached into the pocket of his linen shorts, withdrawing a small box that made Zaviana's breath catch. "This isn't what you think," he said quickly, noting her expression. "Or rather not exactly." Opening the box revealed not a traditional engagement ring, but a beautifully crafted band of rose gold, inlaid with a pattern that mimicked ocean waves. At its center sat a small, perfect pearl, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the fading sunlight. "I had this made for you," Tyleo explained, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "The design is based on the music you were playing the night Aziel found me. I had an artist transcribe the melody into a visual pattern." Zaviana stared at the ring, too moved to speak. The thought that had gone into the gift, the personal meaning behind it rather than a generic symbol of wealth or status, touched her deeply. "It's not an engagement ring," he continued. "Not yet. I know we're still finding our way, still learning to trust this connection that somehow survived 5 years of separation." He took a deep breath. "It's a promise ring, my vow that no matter what happens between us romantically, I will always be there for you and Aziel, always honor what we've built, always protect the family we've created." Tears spilled down Zaviana's cheeks as she looked. From the ring to the man holding it, this complex, wounded, extraordinary man who had fought his way back to her across all odds. "It's beautiful," she whispered, allowing him to slip it onto her right hand. "And so is the promise." Tyleo lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers, just above the ring. "There's more," he said, his expression shifting to something both serious and hopeful. "I've been thinking about what happens when we return to the city." "Back to reality," she said with a slight smile. He shook his head. "Back to a new reality, one we create together. I don't want to go back to our previous arrangement, you and Aziel in the guest house, me in the main house. It was never meant to be permanent." Zaviana tensed slightly, unsure where this was heading. "What are you suggesting?" "I found a property," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "A house that belongs to neither of us yet. Neutral territory where we could start fresh. It has room for Aziel to grow, a dedicated music studio for you, and office space for me to work remotely more often." His eyes held hers intently. "Equal partners building something together, not you and Aziel fitting into my existing life or vice versa." The thoughtfulness of the proposal, addressing her need for independence while acknowledging their desire to be together, left Zaviana momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, he continued, words tumbling out as if he feared losing his courage. "I've also set up a trust for Aziel that guarantees his education and health care, but that you control as his mother. And I've spoken to my lawyers about establishing legal co-guardianship without any impact on your parental rights." He took a breath. "I want us to have a future together, Zaviana. But I need you to know you're choosing it freely, not because you feel financially obligated or legally trapped." Zaviana studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his careful plans. This powerful man, who could command business empires with a word, was laying his heart bare, offering her choices rather than dictating terms. "You've thought of everything," she said softly. "I've tried," he admitted, "because the thought of losing you again, of you feeling you need to run from me, is unbearable." She stepped closer, placing her palm against his cheek. "I'm not running anymore, Tyleo." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as the last rays of sunlight gilded the water around their feet. When their lips met, It felt like both a beginning and a culmination, the natural progression of a journey that had begun in rain and darkness and now continued in sunlight and hope. "Mama! Daddy! Look at my castle!" Azil's voice broke the moment, reminding them of the precious reality they'd created together. Hand in hand, they walked back up the beach to admire their son's creation. Thylio lifted Aziel onto his shoulders to survey his architectural achievement from above, the boy's delighted laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Later, after Aziel had been tucked into bed in the beach house, Xaviana found Thylio on the lanai, a glass of wine in hand as he gazed at the moonlit ocean. "He went right to sleep," she said, accepting the glass he offered. "The sea air exhausts him." Thylio smiled, drawing her down beside him on the cushioned lounger. "He asked if we were going to live together forever now," he confessed. "I told him that was my greatest hope." Xaviana rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady heartbeat that had become her favorite sound. "What did he say to that?" "He said it was about time, because he was tired of having to choose which parent to ask for cookies." Thylio's chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Apparently, we have different cookie policies." "Definitely something we need to align on," she teased, turning to face him. In the moonlight, his features were softened, the usual intensity giving way to a contentment she'd never seen before they became a family. "I want to see the house," she said finally. "The one you found for us. If I like it, then yes, I think. It's time we stopped living between two worlds." Joy transformed his expression, making him suddenly, strikingly younger. Without speaking, he pulled her into a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: gratitude, desire, and a love so profound it seemed to transcend their brief history together. As the kiss deepened, Xaviana felt the last of her reservations dissolve. This was no fairy tale where wealth and privilege solved all problems, no fantasy where past wounds magically disappeared. This was something far more precious. Two imperfect people choosing each other daily, building a family from the broken pieces of their pasts, creating something beautiful and enduring from what fate had given them. When they finally made their way to bed, their lovemaking held a new dimension, not just passion and need, but the certainty of commitment, the promise of a shared future stretching before them. In the aftermath, tangled in sheets and each other, Xaviana traced the contours of Thylio's face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I'd find this," she confessed in the darkness. "Someone who sees me completely and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," he corrected, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Because of who you are, in your entirety, your strength, your talent, your fierce protective love, even your stubborn independence that drives me crazy sometimes." His smile was visible even in the dim light. "Every part of you is precious to me." As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms with their son sleeping peacefully down the hall, Xaviana allowed herself to fully embrace the truth she'd been fighting since Aziel had recognized his father at the festival, that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful journeys, and that love, when it's real, finds a way to overcome any obstacle, even time and distance themselves. Chapter 10. Full Circle 1 Year. Later, the rain fell in a gentle, cleansing curtain around the garden of their new home, a historic Victorian with sprawling grounds that had captivated Xaviana's heart the moment she'd seen it. Inside, she stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, her ivory silk gown shimmering against her dark skin like moonlight on water. The delicate crown of wildflowers and tiny pearls in her hair caught the light as she turned, a vision of the beauty that had always existed within her, now radiating outward for all to see. "You look like an angel," came a small voice from the doorway. Aziel stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, golden eyes, so like his father's, wide with wonder. "Just like Daddy said you were the night you saved him." Xaviana knelt, careful of her dress, and drew her son close. The scent of his freshly washed hair brought tears to her eyes. This miracle child who had brought his father back to her against impossible odds. "I have something special," Aziel whispered conspiratorially, opening his small palm to reveal the wedding rings nestled beside a tiny silver piano charm. "Daddy says music is what kept you connected, even when you were apart, that your song lived in his soul, even when he couldn't remember your face." Emotion threatened to overwhelm her. "That's true, little star," she managed. "Some connections can't be broken, not by time or distance or even lost memories." Through the window, she could see their intimate gathering of guests sheltered beneath a crystalline canopy in the garden. Fairy lights twinkled despite the early evening darkness brought by the storm clouds, creating a magical glow that seemed to defy the rain. And there, standing beneath an arch woven with jasmine and wildflowers, waited Taelio, his tall frame commanding yet vulnerable as he scanned the house for the first glimpse of his bride. "Ready, Mama?" Aziel asked, slipping his small hand into hers. Xaviana nodded, throat too tight for words. Together they descended the stairs and paused at the French doors leading to the garden. The soft strains of a string quartet, playing the melody she'd composed during those lonely months of pregnancy, drifted through the rain-freshened air. The moment Taelio saw her, his entire being transformed. The controlled, powerful man who commanded boardrooms with a word fell away, revealing only the raw, unguarded soul who had whispered secrets to her in the darkness 5 years ago. Tears gleamed unashamedly in his eyes as he watched her approach on Aziel's arm, their son beaming with importance and joy. Their vows, written separately but somehow perfectly complementary, spoke of souls recognizing each other across time and circumstance, of love that had survived separation and silence, of the family they'd created against all odds. "You found me when I was broken," Taelio's deep voice caressed each word, "and showed me that true strength lies in vulnerability. In your arms that night, I discovered what it meant to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in my life. When fate tore us apart, something of you remained with me, a melody I couldn't forget, a peace I couldn't find elsewhere." Xaviana's answering vows trembled with emotion. "In the darkest time of my life, you gave me light, our son, who carried your eyes and your spirit. Even believing you'd chosen to leave, I couldn't regret a moment of what we shared. Now standing here with you both, I understand that some loves transcend understanding. Some souls are meant to find each other no matter how winding the path." When Aziel presented the rings, his clear voice rang out, "My daddy and mama love each other forever and ever, just like I always knew they would." The simple truth from a child's lips brought fresh tears to every eye. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the rain suddenly softened, and a beam of golden sunset light broke through the clouds, illuminating them in what guests would later describe as an almost otherworldly glow. It was as if nature itself blessed their union, acknowledging the rare and precious bond they shared. Later, as their small gathering celebrated around them, Taelio led Xaviana to a secluded corner of the garden where a white grand piano waited, sheltered from the elements. "One last surprise," he murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers across her skin. "The night we met, your music brought me back from the edge. Every day since we found each other again, your voice and your touch have healed parts of me I thought would always remain broken." Xaviana sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys with practiced grace. The melody that emerged was familiar yet transformed. What had once been tinged with longing and loss now spoke of fulfillment and joy, the musical journey mirroring their own. As the final notes hung in the rain-cleansed air, Thailio knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. 5 years ago, I awakened in a stranger's apartment with only fragments of memory, the scent of jasmine, the touch of gentle hands, a voice that seemed to come from my very soul. Today, I stand complete, with the woman who saved me in every way a person can be saved, and the son who recognized what neither of us could deny. Tears slipped down Xaviana's cheeks as she cradled his face between her palms. "Some loves are written in the stars," she whispered. "Ours was written in rain and music and the golden eyes of our son." Their kiss held the promise of all the years to come, passionate nights and quiet mornings, challenges faced together, a family bound not by convention, but by the deepest love. As if summoned by their thoughts, Aziel appeared, slipping between, them with the natural confidence of a child who has never doubted his place in the world. Together, the three of them stood in the gentle rainfall, faces lifted to the clearing sky where stars began to emerge, their reflection dancing in the raindrops that clung to the garden all around them. In that perfect moment, the circle closed. What had begun in a storm-drenched night of desperation and unlikely connection had transformed into something rare and precious, a love that had transcended loss, separation, and even memory itself to create a family bound by something deeper than blood or circumstance. As they stood entwined, whispers of their past echoing in the rainfall around them, Xaviana and Thailio silently renewed the promise they had just made before witnesses, that this love, tested by time and strengthened by trials, would remain their greatest truth, their safest harbor, their most beautiful song for all the days to come.